Ready to explore the latest trends in real estate? What are innovators in building planning for the future? The Ralph Bivens Project digs deep into the minds of key players in the industry and discussions with today's thought leaders. I'm Ralph Bivens. As a journalist who's covered the real estate and development industry for decades, I invite you to join me as we probe for new ideas and projects that will be making headlines soon. We love to ask hard questions to interesting people. When you've done over 100,000 interviews, you seem to get enlightening answers. Don't forget to download and review this podcast on Apple, Spotify, and wherever you get your audio inspiration. You can also watch and subscribe on YouTube or visit realtynewsreport.com. Welcome to the Ralph Bivens Project. I'm Ralph Bivens. I'm here today with Jeff Havsy, a noted economist with Moody Analytics. He's the commercial real estate industry practice lead at Moody's. And he, by the way, mark your calendar now. He's going to be in Houston to give the economic outlook to Comgate. So it's September 11th at Houston Country Club. And so we'll talk about the economy in the afternoon and then have a reception after that. It'll be a great event. And I hope you guys come. There are a lot of people we communicate to all the time, and so I'll be there. So stop by, say hi, and would like to see my old friends. See how everybody's doing. But that's September 11th. Jeff used to be the chief economist at CBRE, chief economist of the Americas, and he knows a lot about what's going on. And I guess my first question, I'm thinking is September 11th, and then of course right after that, the next week, the Federal Reserve, the Reserve Open Market Committee will be meeting, and everybody's been wondering about that and talking about what will the Fed do in September. So, Jeff, what do you think is going to happen at that Federal Reserve meeting?
Ralph, first of all, thank you for having me. I'm excited to do this. I look forward to talking to you. You always have great insights, so I really enjoy your program. It's interesting, right? Because I feel like the market had a little temper tantrum and they overreacted. It was one number, and we know when we look at the jobs numbers, there can be significant revisions in one direction or another. In this case, it came in, but it was still a positive number, right? It was still over 100,000 jobs. It was just the lowest in a couple of years. Normally, we would have said, 100,000 jobs, still pretty good. Instead, the market went, I'm not having this, which was crazy.
That being said, the stock market was scary. Everybody was freaking out.
So I have a quick story on that. So one of my first job was actually designing new financial products for the Chicago Board of Trade. And it's back in the late 90s. And we actually hit a circuit breaker, right? Because I had designed the product. I got to stop trading when we hit that circuit breaker on the Dow Jones Industrial Index. And I think part of it, one of the reasons they had that was sometimes sentiment gets in the way. And I think that's a little bit what we had earlier this week was we just got wound up. You look at the job numbers, they're still right there. They weren't as strong, but unemployment claims came in low yesterday. So we may have overreacted. There might have been some technical issues, right? Because we had some storms down south that impacted some of the hiring, hit some of the construction. One number does not make a trend. So while we think the Fed may lower, it's not a guarantee. So let's put the brakes on this. Let's hold off. I remember earlier this year when I was at CBRE, and I heard people talking saying, we're going to have 6 rate cuts this year. What is wrong with you? So I'm not even sure we're going to get September. I think that's the highest probability, but it's not 100%.
You think they will cut in September?
Just barely. I'm leaning that way, but as I said, it's just, and again, I've heard people talk about 50 or more. It's going to be 25. Like if they do it, it's 25. It's not 50.
Well, a lot of people thought that when they had, I guess in July, that they should have done a 25 basis point cut there and kind of go gradual. But some people say, hey, he's the Federal Reserve's either too slow, too late, or too early. On one end or another, there's always complaints about how that goes down.
Exactly. It's a thankless job. As an economist, you're looking, you go, okay, on one hand, I'd love to be a Fed governor. On the other hand, you look, wow, you're never right. Everybody's angry with you. So it is a tough thing.
Yeah, right. Boy, after the stock market dropped the other day, was people were talking, well, do they need to do come in an emergency rate cut? And that was, but that didn't happen. That seemed like that was overblown to me. But they didn't, of course. Not yet, anyway.
and look, and the market rose since then, right? It's come back. So, sometimes we just need to get out of our own way and let, like all of us, right? Human nature, we get wound up, we get caught up in the emotion, and then things go too far. Good night's sleep, okay, and we've come back a bit. So, we'll see how it goes. I think the biggest thing is the sentiment, right? So a 25 basis point cut is not changing. I mean, yes, it's going to change some of the costs, but it's small relative to where financing costs have been. The biggest thing is with the signal that it sends. And I think people need to keep that in mind, is that just because you cut 25 basis points, the next day your costs aren't going down dramatically. They'll go down a little bit, but it's more we're into that easing era. And I think that's going to be the bigger issue. And we'll talk about property fundamentals in a little bit. There isn't a lot of rent growth in the market right now. So even, the higher financing costs, even moving down 25 basis points, it's still, there's still things we have to work through.
Right. Well, of course, it's been huge for home buyers and home builders and things of that nature, but it's also had quite an impact on the commercial real estate industry too.
Exactly. And, you do have a bit of a substitution effect, and, people being able to say, hey, apartments versus home buying. We have seen rent drops. I think, we look at one of those other Texas cities, we're not going to talk to you, but Austin, significant drops, right? Depending on among the biggest in the country. Again, hasn't offset what you had from, 2020 through 2023, but, there's a lot of supply there. And the fundamentals are still going to be soft for a little bit.
Right. That was the craziest thing. And I was there, just a few weeks ago downtown. There's eight big cranes just in downtown with new projects coming up. A lot of that's, residential towers, but there are some hotels and there are some mixed use towers that have multiple uses, residential and commercial mixed. But you think and you've got the Google building that was completed over a year ago, and they still haven't moved in, and you don't know. But of course, then on the other hand, you've had X, Twitter, saying they're going to move their headquarters, and you would think to Austin they are going to do it, but they could take some space. And, they have.
Well, I'd be curious to see how much space they really take, right? Often when we see those headquarter announcements. I was living in Chicago when Boeing announced that they were moving. And yes, it was a big thing, but they didn't take as much space as you think. We'll look at Houston. Obviously, Chevron has announced they're moving there. It's great. It's good for the city. It makes good headlines. I'm not sure how much absorption is going to, really impact. I don't think we're talking millions of square feet. I think, it might be a couple 100,000 square feet to start.
Yeah, they've got two buildings, of course, in downtown Houston, and they were former Enron buildings, as a matter of fact. But they're there, and we'll interesting to see. You're right. I don't think it's going to be like 1,000 people right away. But the CEO did say he will be operating out of Houston before the end of the year, and some of the top officers in C-suite will be there in downtown Houston. It's a plus. Dow Jones index company, really big, really important. So it gives some momentum. Give a bragging right at least to the people.
That's actually, I think, is the biggest thing, is the bragging rights, and then you get all the auxiliary services and the support that goes with it. Often that will bring on more than that company alone.
Also, downtown Houston, we've just recently there were this. The word iconic is overused, but this building built in 1927, the Esperson building, beautiful, ornate. It was foreclosed upon, and occupancy's down and things, and but finding when your valuations are down and your occupancy's down, and you've got to find a new loan. That's kind of been difficult in a lot of places, hasn't it?
Yeah, no, but that building strikes me as one where it might be ripe for conversion. And we've actually done a bunch of work on it, and conversions are very hard. It's talked about all the time, but very few get done. I can tell you, in New York, between 2020 and 2000 and 2020, an average of 2 buildings a year. Now, with all the hype, there's only up to 4 buildings a year. It's not materially moving the needle, but it's up, 100%. But the way it really works is when you have cool buildings like that, you can keep the facade, and maybe you have some inlay or a really neat lobby, and you can get some funky stuff. That's the type of building where, depending on the structure, right? It depends on the water and the piping and the electric and whatnot. But if you can do that, people want to live in that. The biggest issue is like the 1960s big square block brutalist building. It's like no one wants to be. So I wonder if that price has dropped because it has hit foreclosure, if that building works. And again, I'm not intimately familiar with the inside to be able to know that an architect's going to have to take a look at that. But like something like that, I think might be a cool space. As you look at some of the conversions that have worked, that might be one.
It's a beautiful structure, and it really is a beautiful structure. Yeah, but yeah, I was but that whole topic about in the bill, we've had a few other foreclosures lately, and that uses more of that, and the availability of people to refinance those buildings, the owners. Can you speak to that?
Sure, but it's funny. I describe it as the problem isn't that office is overbuilt. At the moment, office is under demolished. And
That's good. I'm going to copy that. I love that.
Yeah. So it actually went back. People used to talk about that for retail. So I just repurposed it to office, but that was like people talked about retail a decade ago. So it wasn't even mine. But I think we're going to see that, right? Where you have some of this B- at best, C buildings really that are functionally obsolete, that really should not be in use anymore. And trying to refinance them and re-tenant them. Now, don't get me wrong. We need some B- space. We need some C space. There are a lot of users out there that need cost-effective space. You have nonprofits. You have small professional services, whether it's a 2-person law firm or a 3-person accounting or 4-person marketing. All those people need some of that cost-effective space. We just have too much of it. Not every building is suited for repurpose. In some cases, you have to knock it down. I know that is not good for the environment, and we can have, that's a separate discussion. People have very strong opinions on that, but some of that needs to be done because we do have too much space, and it just can't be refinanced because it will never be occupied to a level that will create cash flow to pay off that loan. So that building needs to be redone, and depending where it is, that land may be incredibly valuable. I know in suburban Chicago, the old Allstate headquarters, again, be suburban, they just knocked it down, and then they're putting up, 1,000 homes, something. It's a big number. It's a big plot of land. In some cases, you have to do that. Right now, knocking things down in the suburbs is a lot less challenging. You can do it very cheaply compared to, disassembling a building in a downtown locale. The cost is much higher.
Yeah. That's it would be. I know that you've written about and studied some of the the other part behind this, of course, is the office situation is COVID and the way we got used to working at home, remote work. And so now you have, corporations like maybe they used to occupy 100,000 feet and they've signed a new lease and it's only for 65,000. They're downsizing, and you don't have to come into work every day. What do you think about that issue, the remote work and productivity?
Well, I think the really smart firms are looking and saying, we want you to office with purpose. And it's probably a hybrid mix, but it varies not only by firm, but by group within a firm. But there's value, as you know, like I write a fair amount. I have to put together the presentation for when I'm coming to Houston. It's not bad being at home, closing the door and just focusing, right? And commuting into the office that day is probably not the most effective use of my time, where I'm trying to go to heads down and not be disturbed. Now, that being said, I'm a huge fan of the office. I was just in New York earlier this week, seeing my colleagues, and I let them know, hey, I'm coming to the office, and we try to make sure, okay, everybody come in that day. And it's the planning, but also the accidental interactions, talking to people on different teams who you may not otherwise see. We also look at how mentoring works. So your junior employees, just by listening, they can pick up a lot. And then they may have a little something. They're not going to ping their boss, but they may step into his or her office if they're right behind them or in the cube next to them. Yeah. So there's a lot of value with that. But let's go back a second and talk about going from 100 to 65. What was one of the greatest productivity killers, again, on a relative basis, for office space? The open floor plan, right?
Oh, there you go.
Wait, raise your hand if you want to sit in an open floor plan, right? Nobody wants that. Why did companies do it? They said, oh, it's cheap. I can save a lot of money. I think companies are going to have to be much smarter. And as we look at that, yeah, they may go to 65, but I think over time they may realize, you know what, I may need 100 to 75, but my build out needs to be right. And that's actually not going to be cheaper. It's going to be more expensive. So even though they may be cutting space, they need to lay that space out properly. And that actually is going to cost more because you're going to need collaboration areas, but you're also going to need the phone booths. So if I want to go heads down, I can close the door. Again, I don't need an office. I'm not there every day, but we do need that flexibility where people can collaborate, but they can also be out of the noise and the din and get stuff done. And then at home, you can do other things. So as I said, I was in New York. I don't need to be in the office to do my expense report today, right? Like that. So it's finding the right mix. And yes, there will be some removal of office usage. But I think we're overstating, and I worry about the pendulum swinging too far, and I worry about the long-term impact on productivity. I think Gen AI is going to be great, but we're in this J curve where actually we're still learning. You think about how long it took for Microsoft Office from when it came out to really when it started enhancing productivity. I think we're in the same thing now with Gen AI, but I worry long-term, if we're not in the office the right amount, and I'm not saying what the right amount is, right? Because it is going to vary depending on the usage, that is going to impact GDP growth, and it's going to impact our ability, right? Because higher productivity, faster economic growth means you can pay more wages without being inflationary. So yes, office is in a tricky spot, but it's not just I'm going to cut space, because if you don't do it right, you're going to have problems with your corporate culture and your productivity growth. And I think people are missing that right now.
Yeah, to get that right, your point about the new hire, the recent grad that starts, and you're at the company, and man, if you don't go in the office and don't know, you hardly ever see your boss, and all those things. It would be hard to get get involved in the company and figure out what the culture is and learn about the business. That's those poor recent grads in the last few years. It's difficult. How can it not be?
It's interesting though. The pendulum has swung, so they actually want to be in the office. The problem you have is those first and second line managers above them, who may have young families, who are no longer in city centers or suburban locations with that greater density where they have the smaller units. They may have young families, they've bought a house or they're in a bigger apartment a little further out, and the commute impacts them more than the recent grads. They're not going out after work, right? They're going out, and those are the ones who don't want to commute. So that's often where the disconnect is. And I find that interesting. Companies are just starting to recognize that, but for a long time, oh, no, the young kids don't want to come in. I'm like, no, that's actually not true.
That's great. Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. The other thing we've seen a lot of, maybe it's everywhere, I don't know, but we've seen a lot of industrial, warehouses, distribution, just a ton of it built in our area and across the country. I believe it's just so much. That may be part COVID related too, but some of that acceleration of people want to buy stuff online, have it drop at the door. It's so convenient. You don't have to get in the car. Bam, it's there. What's that? Talk to me a little bit about the industrial segment.
Absolutely, right? Because it doesn't take that long to tilt up 4 walls and drop a roof on it, right? So to your point, there's a lot of supply. Now I'm going to give you a little bit of a contrarian view on this.
All right.
So we're going
to,
take it for what it's worth, right? People agree or disagree, but I think it's a great discussion point. And part of our discussion here is we're educating the viewers. They don't have to agree, but hopefully they'll come away and say, I hadn't thought about that. I need to at least think about that. And that is, to your point, right? We had a lot of online shopping. We've been seeing a lot more warehouse and this distribution, these big centers. But what has been happening with them? Not only are the footprint's about the same, right? 500,000 to 1 million. The roof keeps going up, right? We keep raising the roof. The cubic footage keeps increasing. We've gone from 32 to 36 to 40. We're up to 44 on the clearance now. We need to stop thinking in terms of square footage, and we need to start thinking in terms of cubic footage. So the demand may not be as great going forward, not because we have less stuff, but because more stuff can go through those warehouses because it has greater cubic range. Now that means you can charge more for it, but there isn't as much demand going forward. That also leads to greater functional obsolescence more quickly.
yeah.
Just because the racking systems are now,
but
the racking systems are worth more, so you need power, you need super flat floors to run the robots. So in the past, people say, oh, I can save a quarter, I'm going to move one exit down the highway. They don't do that anymore because they've put all this into the warehouse. So they're less likely to change to the new ones, assuming it meets their specifications. And if you only had a 36 and now the 44 is across the street, well, wait, they go in the 44, the 36 may have trouble attracting, and you can't subdivide it. Because the one thing we've seen a lot of is those smaller, almost flex space, smaller warehouses, where you had your local contractors such as plumbing, pool, electric supply, whatever it is, even light manufacturing potentially. It's very hard to build 50 to 150 nowadays, especially near in, and you can't subdivide that 36 one as easily into 3,000 and 5,000 square feet that those type of users need. So I think in the past 2 decades, rising tide, didn't matter what warehouse you bought, it did fine. I think going forward, investors need to be a lot more strategic about that because of the change. Again, I still believe in warehouse, but I think you need to be much more targeted and much smarter about how you do it going forward. And again, that may not be today, that may be in a year, but given your hold period, you better be paying attention to that.
That's a great thought. Expansion but expanding upward. I know that at one time, I was, I guess Tokyo or someplace like that. They were talking about multi-level, building high-rise storage, and that's
Oh, that's happening here too. I was in Chicago a couple weeks ago. They have one in Chicago. I've seen it in Seattle. And
really.
again, given the price of the land, depending, right? Houston obviously has a lot more land. They don't have the same density issues that some of these other cities have. But I've seen it's in New York, it's in Chicago, where you want near in delivery for that last mile, and
That's
they
the
can
way
do
to
it.
go.
Yeah.
Expand
And
up. That's great. Okay, well, what about retail and shopping centers, malls, things like that? What's your
so
next step?
retail's the darling right now. Everybody loves retail. It's the best performer, even with the B malls. But you take the B malls out, and everything else is doing great. B malls are kind of a drag on it, right? You don't want to be the third mall in a two mall town. But you look at neighborhood centers, community centers, all those grocery anchored centers, they're doing very well. But even power centers are back. And what's really interesting is some of this old retail that really, you see on a highway looks kind of ugly. I'll tell you, I have an 11-year-old daughter, and we went to a place called Monster Golf the other day. I don't know if you've seen it, but it's a glow in the dark mini golf inside.
All right.
It doesn't have to be pretty on the outside, right? In fact, the fact that it looked kind of grungy added to the ambiance of Monster Golf. Hey, we had a blast. I recommend anybody that wants to do glow in the dark mini golf. It's a lot of fun. But B, we're seeing more and more concepts like that. And because we haven't built nearly as much retail, right? We are overbuilt. We're finally catching up. In 2022, we had more store openings than store closings for the first time in almost 15 years.
Wow.
That held in 2023. So what you have is old retail that's been demolished over the past decade. Demand has finally caught up and is now ahead of, it's not negative anymore in terms of the store closings. So retail's doing well. We see new concepts. We see it. It's not just goods, it's services, right? I mean, you have trampoline parks, you have mini golf, you have batting cages, you have axe throwing, you name it, right? Hopefully the alcohol comes after the axe throwing, but you're seeing different types of concepts that are taking all sorts of interesting spaces. So overall, retail is doing really well. It's been the strongest performer. And again, there are exceptions to every rule, and as we say, B malls are struggling. But other than that, power centers to fortress malls to the neighborhood and community, we're just seeing a great mix there, and that's doing well.
And then the regional malls, the Sears, Penny, Dillard's, three anchors, enclosed, air conditioned. What's going to happen with those guys?
So that's the interesting thing, because they often own that, right?
The anchors own space. Okay.
Yeah, so it takes a little working out, but we've seen them turned into, again, chopped up and divided into other things. They can become food courts. I've seen it become co-working space. So there's a concept that I talk about which is necessity office. So let's say you're the county you're in, the jail or the courthouse is located at one end. They want to put on an auxiliary site at the other. You can turn that into it. And then all of a sudden, hey, wait a second, the lawyers and other service providers might be that, or the driver's license. But they often want to be places where there's a lot of parking, there's foot traffic, and you have services, you have retail services such as coffee shops, fast casual food, things like that. So you've seen turned into office, as I said, you've seen them turned into food courts, you've seen them turned into other retail. I've seen even last mile distribution come out of that. I've seen pickup for those people that are in locations where it's hard to get in, right? You can have stuff delivered there and then take it home yourself. So that's the one thing about real estate. We are incredibly creative, and I've seen that space reused in a number of different ways.
You're right. That's a of course, you talk to people all over the nation. You're based in the Northeast, and but I was just, you know, here in Houston. I just want, what's the perception of Houston from people around the country and decision makers around the country? Just be honest. We
Yeah,
won't take a guess, but what do people think of Houston?
yeah, so it's interesting, right? Houston's been among the fastest growing metros. It's huge now. Nobody's a fan of the Astros, I have to tell you. Everywhere I go, if you're a baseball fan, the Astros come up in a negative way, but we'll put that aside for a moment.
They're getting ready to beat the Red Sox pretty soon.
I'm a Phillies fan. I grew up in Philadelphia, so you already beat us in the World Series. Was it a couple years ago? But the recent storms have started to change the perception. The worry about climate is creeping in, and that's something new that I hadn't really heard of. Again, they had storms, one storm, two storms, but now it's like, wait, Houston's been hit for the last 5 years or whatever the number is. That's actually now, when they see it on TV and they see the flooding, even though it's a small subsection, right? It's not all of Houston. It gets in the conscious, and that's actually something new. So that, to me, is a potential headwind that Houston did not have before that is interesting, to pay attention to. But other than that, as I say, Houston's growth has been very good, but I do worry about the impression regarding the storms that have hit and what happens there.
Yeah, the flooding, you're right. It can be very isolated. One part of town gets 7 inches or something, but everybody else gets 2 or 1. But it can be isolated. But it makes video that people can glob onto, and it gets published, it gets picked up.
Right, and if you don't live there, you don't understand the differences, right? You don't know the nuances of the neighborhood and where that is, and it's only a small site. You just see flooding in Houston on the ticker going by.
Well, that's right. Yeah, and that's perception. I don't know how to solve that. I mean, there's a lot. We need to do something to detract from that, and so Houston didn't get bad pub all the time. Whenever it rains. But we get, I don't know, but like you said, we got positive pub with the Chevron relocation announcement. The city got some benefit from that, and it may not be a lot of jobs per se. May not immediately. They say over 5 years they'll be moving more and more here, but expand a little bit about that perception when you get a major corporation like that moving to your city. What are some of the benefits that they may not be filling office space or bringing in thousands of jobs immediately, but what were the other side benefits of getting a corporate relocation of that nature?
Absolutely. First, I was going to say, I think how you market it is, hey, Houston, at least we got water, right? You can compare that to other markets around the country that are running out of water. So I say that a little tongue in cheek. But obviously, the bringing in a national headquarters like that's part of, it's one of the biggest, companies in the world. Even if they themselves don't bring a ton of jobs, by saying we're a headquarters city, it's going to help. I'm sure there were things with the airport, right? So they increase the number of flights, they make it easier to get to and from, so that benefits the market as a whole. But to your point, all those service providers are going to either be there, or if they're there already, grow there, right? Whether it's law firms or accounting firms or consultants, food service into the headquarters, because even if there are a couple hundred more people, right, they're still probably going to have more lunches that come in or dinners or whatever it is. That is a huge multiplier. So while Chevron in itself may only bring a couple hundred people initially, maybe take a couple 100,000 extra square feet, that multiplier effect is dramatic, and telling the world, hey, we're a headquarters city, we're a global city, is a huge thing that will attract attention, and that could, becomes a positive story. It just reinforces itself going forward.
We also have launched, expansion for the convention center I think it's the GOP convention is scheduled in 4 years and gets a lot of media in town and stuff and decision makers, of course. But there's pretty significant expansion to the George R. Brown Convention Center in downtown. What is there? What's the ceiling for Houston? I mean, Las Vegas does it has pretty bad weather too. If you don't like heat, but they're a huge convention city, and so what is there a chance that Houston could have a really significant? It is in the middle of the country, flights so we can get here quick. But what's the potential on the?
I think that's less so because there are a lot of cities doing that, right? And people try to drive that economic incentive. In addition, you have Orlando in addition to Las Vegas, right? So you already have two kind of supernovas up top. And then you have a number of cities throughout the country that are increasing their convention center space. So it is a cutthroat business. It is very difficult. Again, it allows you to bring in conventions that you may not otherwise get, but the competition is pretty fierce. So while I think it's a good thing, I'm not sure that it's going to have the same impact that people envisioned when they first proposed it, because everybody else tried to do it at the same time.
Well, you've done some studies on the state. You've mentioned the Texas Triangle, Dallas,
Yep.
Austin, San Antonio, Houston, and all the growth that's anticipated there over the next few decades. Talk to me a little bit about the Texas Triangle.
Absolutely, and we'll talk more about this when I come to the Comgate presentation. I'm going to spend a fair amount of time comparing and contrasting, where different markets are. Dallas obviously has a huge warehouse market, and it's from the Mexican border. It's a great place to drive, get further into the country, and then distribute out. Houston has the shipping channel, so that helps it. Okay, so those two are definitely advantageous relative to Austin and San Antonio on the warehouse market. As we mentioned, Houston actually has water. Dallas, San Antonio, yes, there's some, but I actually think that is more helpful, that over the longer term, if we happen to see climate change and increased temperatures, the ability for Houston to say, hey, we're not running out of water is going to be beneficial. With regards to the apartment market, we mentioned Austin is overbuilt, but Austin has the state capital, has the University of Texas. Not to say that these other metros don't have excellent schools, but Texas is the flagship. And for those of you who went to A&M, I understand. I've actually been to an Aggies game. I've been to Yale practice. I get it, but the perception outside of Texas is definitely a UT rather than an A&M thing. So I think that's going to help Austin relative to Houston in terms on the tech side. So, San Antonio just kind of seems to cruise below the radar there. It's less volatile. I think it's more, I don't say slow, but steadier compared to the other three markets. So we'll see how that plays out. Obviously, there's a fair amount of tourism that goes to San Antonio, so they definitely benefit
Beautiful
from that.
The Riverwalk downtown is pretty cool.
Exactly, and then I think it's is it 30 minutes north of there? There's a you can go tubing on
the Guadalupe River.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. So it has a lot there. So I think that benefits there on the hotel side. So that's going to be beneficial to San Antonio. So they kind of each have their strengths. We'll see how that mixes and matches, right? Houston just attracted Chevron, but Dallas is competing on, for other office. Mobile is there. Their airport is, Dallas-Fort Worth is a bigger airport. So, we'll see how it competes, but Houston is holding its own for the moment. And again, in any given day, depending on the property type, they kind of bounce back and forth, but it's, I'd just say San Antonio, I think is less of an office industrial market. Austin is definitely less than an industrial market than Dallas and Houston are.
We've, a lot of, they still talk about this, that the expansion between, I think I don't know if it's 75 miles, I think, from Austin to San Antonio, and the courses that expand out, it
They're
gets
growing together. Yeah. It's kind of like the DC and Baltimore, have kind of grown together. And there's some other examples around the country where you see kind of it just becomes a giant metropolitan area. I will be curious, right? There have been some proposals on train service. Again, I'm a bit biased. I live in the Northeast. I took Amtrak yesterday to come back. I love the Acela. The weather was crappy here. The flights were delayed, but the train on time.
rolling. Oh,
Exactly. So
they've talked about it. I think that ultimately having the high speed rail Dallas to Houston, I think was talked about as the first leg, and then of course you fill in the triangle over time, and that could be, you wouldn't put so much pressure on Southwest Airlines to cover it, and but in some of these things, you go to the airport early, you check in, whatever. Some of these you could just bam, you're there. It's
right. Exactly. Like 4 hours seems to be the thing. So if you have a 4-hour train ride, by the time you get to the airport, you get there early, you fly, you get out, you have to go from your home to the airport, and then from the airport wherever you're going. Especially, it ends up being about equal. You have a lot more space on the train. It's more comfortable. So that's what I say. The Texas Triangle is set up well for rail service if they can ever do it. Again, I know not everybody agrees with me on that, but I'm a big fan.
It's a tough one. And some of the farmers say we don't want eminent domain coming through my farm and whatever. Those kind of not in my backyard, so to speak. It's what I know. Just what last question I'm thinking about just be what keeps Jeff Havsy awake at night when you're worried? Oh, you're looking out towards the future, and you're thinking, if this doesn't go right, we could be in serious trouble. What's the big worry point out there for you?
I worry about our domestic politics. So absolutely right. It's very hard to have a civil conversation anymore with people you disagree with. And I find that very troubling. And then I worry about this, I know I can't control international terrorism, but how that disrupts supply chain. And we've seen our supply chains got stretched so thin. We obviously had the CrowdStrike thing a couple weeks ago. All it takes is one little thing. We've gotten to the point where we're operating on such thin margins, optimal efficiency, but we've gotten rid of redundancy. And I think we've overcorrected there, and that to me is a problem because nothing goes perfect. Everything we break down occasionally, right? That and we don't have that built into our system right now. So I worry about that. And then because now it's not just one domino, it seems to be like 12 of them that fall, and that could lead to a huge economic crisis because we haven't put any enough redundancy or safeguards into the system.
Right. And when that could come through energy, or it could come through, like a big boom, all of a sudden the internet doesn't work. It's all from whatever cause that is. I mean, we saw a little bit of, the retail stock traders got a taste of that when the stock market went down there at the 1st of August and took that big drop. And
right.
They've been listening, wherever they get their news, buy on the dip. And so some of the big companies, it's Schwab, everything, people, they're ready to get in, and they couldn't sign on, I guess, because there's such a big demand for people, day traders, and want to get in. So they couldn't swoop in and pick up the cheap stocks on the big drop. But it could be a lot more serious with power and things like that too.
Right, power, energy. any type of system, right? We talked about being able to go in, but like CrowdStrike, right? All of our computers went down. The airlines couldn't fly, or they fly very limited. Somebody that traffic signals, who knows what it is that because of a software glitch. So yeah, that's what concerns me the most.
Jeff Havsy, thanks for coming, and we're looking forward to your presentation here on September 11th. And if guys that want to buy a ticket or whatever, just go to comgate.com and register for that, and I think I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts at that time. So. But thanks for taking time to talk with me, and all you guys out there. Remember, we got realtynewsreport.com is available for just that's no paywall, so free speech, freedom of press. You can come in and get caught up on local news or really regional real estate news on our website at realtynewsreport.com anytime. Subscribe to our newsletter, and when you click a like on our podcast, the Ralph Bivens Project, click a like. And but Jeff, really enjoyed talking with you, man.
Ralph, thank you for having me. It was a great discussion. I look forward to catching up in person in about a month.
Okay, my friend. Take care.
Talk to you soon. Thank you.